Hello and welcome to Glyndebourne, the most famous opera house in the world outside a city, as the Times recently described it. I'm Alexandra Coghlan, Glyndebourne's opera content specialist, and I'm standing here in Glyndebourne's historic organ room, the place where the whole idea of Glyndebourne, an opera house set in the beautiful Sussex countryside, was dreamt up 80 years ago. I'm here to celebrate OperaPassion Day. All day today, opera houses around the UK are celebrating this wonderful art form. And for the next 20 minutes, we'll be contributing by exploring how opera can convey the emotion of a scene or a story in a very different way to theatre. To do this, we'll be comparing, very quickly, Shakespeare's Hamlet with the opera Hamlet. Did you know that there was an opera of Hamlet? There have actually been about a dozen, but only one smash hit. Earlier this year, Glyndebourne staged the world premiere of Australian composer Bret Dean's opera Hamlet. It received rave reviews, was dubbed the operatic event of the year, and it will be broadcast on BBC4 this Sunday. But what sets this Hamlet apart from Shakespeare's original? We'll be looking very closely at the iconic soliloquy, To Be or Not to Be, which will be performed for us by the amazing actor Samuel West. We'll then hear a performance of the same passage from the opera, performed by the equally brilliant David Butt-Philip and Jennifer France, who play Hamlet and Ophelia in Glyndebourne Tour's forthcoming revival of the show. This way we can hear how Bret Dean's music puts a fresh new spin on some of Shakespeare's most familiar words. All the opera houses taking part in OperaPassion Day are exploring a pair of contrasting emotions. Ours are courage and fear, two emotions that Hamlet oscillates between throughout this speech as he tries to make a decision. Will courage prevail? Will he steel himself and avenge his father's death? Or will fear get the better of him? Will he take the easy way out and commit suicide? I'm delighted to welcome Samuel West to perform To Be or Not to Be for us.
Hello.
Hello, Samuel. You're no stranger either to Shakespeare or to Hamlet, are you?
No, I played this part for a year and 3 days at the Royal Shakespeare Company, 132 performances, which probably to most opera singers sounds like rather a lot. And I've also directed the play at the RSC Fringe.
So what did you think when you heard it was being turned into an opera?
Well, I knew that there were other operas, but I hadn't seen any of them. I did see this one, and it completely exploded my idea of the story in a brilliant way, actually. I thought it was sort of not a version considering, it was a version absolute of its own. Absolutely thrilling.
Well, we'll come back to the musical version in just a bit, but I think first we should be reminded of where this all began. So here is Samuel West performing To Be or Not to Be from Shakespeare's Hamlet.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the many spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought
and enterprises of great pitch and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Soft you now the fair Ophelia. Nymph, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered.
Thank you so much for that. We'll be talking to Samuel a bit more later on about the emotion of that scene. But first, let's hear a very different take on To Be or Not to Be. I'm delighted to welcome David Butt-Phillip and Jennifer France with Tim Anderson at the piano to perform To Be or Not to Be from Bret Dean's opera Hamlet.
Or not to be, or not to be, to be. Aye, there's the point, to die, to sleep, is that all? Aye, all. No, to sleep, to dream. Aye, there it goes, to sleep. Us rather bear those evils we have than fly to others we know not of. Oh, thus conscience makes cowards of us all. Of great peace. Not I. I never gave you aught.
My honoured lord, you know right well you did.
Not I.
And such earnest vows.
Not I. I never gave you aught.
Rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind.
I did love you once. I did love you once.
Indeed, my lord.
I truly, I did love you once.
Indeed, my lord, you made me believe you did.
You should not have believed me. I loved you not.
I was the more deceived.
Get thee to a nunnery! To a nunnery! Go! Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners?
Get thee. Get thee.
A pox! 'Tis scurvy! It hath made me mad! Go! Go! Wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them! To a nunnery! A nunnery! Go! 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 And quickly too! If thou dost marry, marry a fool! A fool! A fool! A fool! A fool!
Tout thou the stars of fire, tout that the sun doth move, tout truth to be a liar, but never, 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 never,
Never, never, never, never doubt my love! Where's your father?
at home, my lord.
Let the doors be shut upon him. Be thou as pure as snow. Thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to a nunnery. To a nunnery go. Go thy ways to a nunnery. Get thee to a nunnery. Get thee to a, get thee to a, get thee to a nunnery.
And I, that sucked the honey from his music toes, oh, say, what no more reason, expect the rose, take out of time. Sweetness, take out of time.
Thank you so much for that. It's quite overwhelming to hear that at such close quarters. I think we should find out a little bit more about the difference between Hamlet in the opera house and in the theatre. So I was wondering, Samuel, there are famously hundreds of ways of performing To Be or Not to Be, but what are the emotions at the heart of this speech?
Well, it depends what you think it is. There are basically two ways of doing any soliloquy: to the audience, as if they're there, and to yourself, as if they're overhearing you. This morning, with the world teetering on the brink of nuclear war, I suppose I think that it's more important to say, life, is it worth it, on the whole? So I would get the emotion of the scene across by asking the questions to the people here, because it's about death, and nobody gets out of here alive. If you're doing a more personal version of it, where the audience is overhearing you, you talk to yourself and invite them in. It's not about showing. Acting isn't showing. It's about being as truthful and transparent as possible and letting them eavesdrop.
And David, is that the same for you? Do you recognise the emotions that Samuel's talking about in
Yes,
your
of course.
version?
Absolutely, yeah. And the way that we play it in the opera, it's very much internalised. The audience aren't there. But the question, of course, is whether, in the way that we stage the scene, whether Hamlet's aware that Ophelia is there is a different question, because she is, of course, on stage, hidden away. But yes, obviously, the emotions that you go through in a piece of text like this are very universal, really, and you've got big shoes to fill, certainly.
So having identified those emotions as an actor, Samuel, how do you then go about conveying them to an audience?
Well, famously, the speech doesn't include the word I, we and us. And where it comes in the play is not very useful for the plot. It's anthologized because it's about death, and nobody can say, I'm sorry, this doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. You know, you could kill yourself, but you're a coward. We all are. That's okay. So I suppose you have to make sure that everybody's included. I mean, when I did it, we turned the lights up, and we sort of stopped the play, because the speech is anthologized so much because it's removed from the plot. Sometimes I've seen productions where it was cut, or rather, I haven't seen it in productions where it was cut. But I think in this setting, in the opera, it's much more personal and fragmented. And we should say, of course, that what they're singing is a version of the so-called bad quarto, To Be or Not to Be, there's the point, which is from a sort of pirated version of Hamlet. So not only is it fragmented musically, it's also not quite the words you were expecting, which is doubly exciting, I think.
Do you find that with an audience, that there's a real element of surprise when you deliver that line?
Yes, absolutely, of course. And famously, pieces only existed for 6 months, but the first line that any of the characters sing in the opera is Hamlet sings, or not to be. You never get the line complete, and as it appears in the play. And Bret Dean, the composer, and the librettist Matthew Jocelyn made an early decision, a very brave and bold decision, which has paid off massively from a creative point of view, to not be entirely faithful to the text and to fragment it and to use parts of it in places where you don't expect, and sometimes from the mouths of characters that you don't expect. And he, by doing so in the first scene, says to the audience, you've come expecting a performance of Hamlet. This is not going to be like a performance of Hamlet that you've seen before. Here are the rules. Here is how this will work. And immediately the audience, I think, buy into that and understand the idiom. And it's a very clever way, from Bret's point of view, is what he would say, of deflecting the expectation of setting a soliloquy that's this famous.
And also not having to sing a four-hour play, which would take about 7 hours.
So we've heard from Samuel how he goes about conveying this speech, but as an opera singer, is it different? Do you find you have tools available to you that he as an actor doesn't, and vice versa?
Of course. I mean, the obvious answer to that question in 2 parts is that I'm, you could argue, restricted in a way that he's not. I have pitch and rhythm to which I have to be faithful, prescribed for me by Bret. And now, of course, when a piece is well written and when text is well set, as this is, that can be an advantage, not a hindrance. Added to that, obviously, I have at my disposal the power of music, and which actors use in a different way. But you know, so conveying the text and the music at the same time, which fundamentally is the whole point of being an opera singer.
I just kept wondering, where was my band?
Yeah.
It was being really moving. I wanted to be underscored.
But you mentioned the advantage of music, and sorry, part of music's advantage is its dialogue. You know, you are playing Ophelia and you're present in this scene in a way you wouldn't be in the theatre. How does that change it?
Exactly. I mean, in this whole section of the play, Ophelia isn't in a lot of it. She obviously isn't there for the famous speech. But what this scene and what actually a lot of the opera has done, what Matthew and Bret have done, is amalgamate several different scenes from the play and kind of squish them all into one scene, which makes for extremely diverse and interesting storytelling, I think. And for me personally, in the play, Ophelia is silent a lot. We were talking about this earlier. She doesn't actually have that many words to say. She's young, and therefore I think that's why she's always been such an intriguing character in literature, in art. I mean, how many beautiful pictures and paintings are there of Ophelia? But nobody really knows an awful lot about her. So what they've done is given me several lines in this scene and throughout the opera that are actually spoken by other characters in the play. And I think it's helped to make her a real person. And I think what this opera does is, in an amazing way, is make all of the characters relevant to today. Even though we're talking language that's 400 years old, it's a very old story. It's also a story that everybody knows, but it's made it new and it's made it interesting for a current audience. And we've worked very hard on making the relationship between Ophelia and Hamlet something touching and real, so that the demise of both of them throughout the play, hopefully the audience go on that journey with us, which is heartbreaking.
And of course it's the music that takes you on that journey. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a bit more about Bret Dean's scoring of this scene? There are some amazing effects going on towards the piano.
Yeah, obviously throughout the piece, Bret's famous for his inventive orchestration. It's one of the things that he's best known for in the music world. And you can hear the lovely Tim has provided us with stones to bang together and a plastic bottle to scrunch. In other places we get sandpaper being rubbed together and tin foil and tuned gongs and whistling. And not to mention, of course, one of the most ingenious devices of this piece, which is an 8-person semi-chorus in the pit who often echo or portray the underlying thoughts of the characters that are speaking on the stage. It's an inspired idea, very inventive, and we have a lot of that in the piece, the way that Bret has of depicting the emotional and psychological state of Hamlet or Ophelia or any of the other characters through the sound world he creates in the orchestra and in the auditorium.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say there's also several satellite bands stationed in different parts of the auditorium at Glyndebourne. So if you come and watch it at Glyndebourne, which you really should, but what you hear is this almost stereo sound world that is something I've never experienced in a theatre ever, let alone an opera. And I think it helps to completely immerse the audience in it, in the story. They feel part of it.
We have instruments all around, in various places in the auditorium, and also at various points in the show, members of the cast and the chorus appear in places and are heard from places that you wouldn't necessarily expect.
We overuse the word immersive, but it sounds like this really is.
Yeah.
And Samuel, you've just heard this powerful performance. Does it shed any new light on the text for you?
Absolutely. The Nunnery scene, Nunnery having the secondary meaning of whorehouse, is basically an assault by Hamlet, whose opinion of women is completely screwed up by the fact that his mother's remarried. He can't trust his girlfriend. He wants to send her away. And in the play, you get to say to a nunnery go a few times, but you don't get to say it 5 times in a row with that rhythm. And these are words as weapons. This actually is a sort of distillation of what the play scene is, and incredibly powerful. And I have to say, Ophelia's mad scene is, in this opera, the greatest depiction of that in any medium I've ever known. It takes the play scene and puts it on another level. It's absolutely shattering.
Because of its extremity, its
Well,
scope?
because the places that the music takes you, rhythmically and melodically,
the extremes to which you have to go in order to sing this, the physical difficulty of what you're doing before you break apart. If I did that as an actor, people would go, oh, brave, bit over the top, but somehow the scaffolding of the music holds it and takes you to a greater extreme, and you go somewhere very, very special.
Do you feel that too, that sense of extremity, of leaving it all out there?
I mean, that scene particularly, both dramatically, emotionally, physically, vocally, it's designed to literally stretch whoever is singing it to their absolute limit. And that's both terrifying and so exhilarating as a performer. And I think there's nothing quite like watching somebody unravel, but also that danger that they're teetering on the edge. When you watch that, it's such an immediate effect that it has on you. And it's exhausting for sure, but it's completely rewarding as well.
Final question to all of you. If Shakespeare were alive today, what would he make of Bret Dean's Hamlet?
As I said earlier, I think the genius of this is that we are speaking 400-year-old words that he wrote that long ago, but somehow it's completely relevant today. And I think Shakespeare would want his words to still be said, but he would want it to adapt. He'd want it to live. He'd want it to grow with the changing times of the world. And I think therefore he'd be intrigued by it for sure.
It would be an early work for him now, wouldn't it? I mean, he'd be writing EastEnders, and he'd want his royalties. But yes, I think he, like any great writer, he cuts the umbilical cord and says, "Take it away and do what you will with it," and they have.
Thank you so much for joining us for this compare and contrast session. I hope you found it insightful. I'd also like to thank our wonderful performers, Samuel West, David Butt-Phillip, Jennifer France, and Tim Anderson. Just a reminder that Bret Dean's Hamlet will be touring the UK for the next couple of months. It opens here at Glyndebourne on Saturday, and then it travels to Plymouth, Norwich, Milton Keynes, and Canterbury. All of those details are available on the Glyndebourne website at glyndebourne.com. You can also catch the show on BBC4 this Sunday, which is the 22nd of October. But however you watch the show, we hope very much that you enjoy it.